welcome you to Art Deco Weekend. I hope that you'll spend the day today taking in all that Art Deco Weekend has to offer, although we have more to offer than you can possibly take in. But visit our store. We have t-shirts, we have posters, and if you haven't been there since the store reopened, it's a much better, much improved shopping experience. Thank you for nodding your head. Take our lectures and take our tours and spend the day with us, because tomorrow the weather is kind of iffy. So I hope you have a great day today, and hopefully we'll be lucky enough to have good weather tomorrow as well. We really very much appreciate our ongoing partnership with the Wolfsonian Museum, which is hosting our 3 lectures today, and we thank them for that. They're always great partners for us, especially during Art Deco Weekend. So enjoy the lecture, and I'll see you on Mission Drive later.
Thank you, Jack, and many thanks to MDPL. We're delighted to be invited to partner every year with the series of talks, and it's really great to be doing it back in person again. We did it online last year, and I thought it was really successful, but it's nice to see real faces in real seats. For those of you that were here this morning, thank you for returning. As you can see, we now have our projector back online, and hopefully it'll stay that way so that our speaker does not have to paint pictures with words, although I'm sure that she could. This afternoon's talk, in fact, has special meaning for me because it involves the return of a scholar I first met many years ago, not long after I first started working at the Wolfsonian. By the way, I didn't introduce myself. My name is John Vogel. I'm Associate Director here at the Wolfsonian. I've been here for quite a while, and just a couple of years after I started, our speaker this morning visited Miami Beach as a Wolfsonian Research Fellow, spending about a month here, and her talk this morning, or this afternoon, partly reflects the results of that research. Danielle Shapiro is the author of John Vassos, Industrial Design for a Modern Life, a biography of the industrial designer, John Vassos. She has a PhD from the Department of Art History and Communication Studies from McGill University, during which time she was engaged as a research fellow on the International Culture of Cities project. Her awards for research on media and history include a teaching fellowship at Harvard, a Fulbright Award, and research support and funding from the Archives of American Art and the Smithsonian American Art Museum, as well as the National Endowment for the Humanities, and as I said before, a research fellowship from the Wolfsonian. Danielle's interest in the history of industrial design was first sparked by a job she held as a curatorial assistant at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian National Design Museum, National Museum of Design. And most recently, she has been a program officer at the National Endowment for the Humanities, and she lives with her twin daughters and husband in Baltimore, Maryland. So I'm going to welcome Danielle up here in a moment. I also want to mention that we have some copies of her book, the book on John Vassos, in our bookshop, and Danielle, will you be available to sign a few copies afterwards? So if you would like to, please, after the talk, go downstairs to our ground floor and to our cafe, and we'll have some books there that are available, and Danielle will be signing. So thank you very much, and thank you, Danielle.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction, John. I really appreciate it, and I have such fond memories of being here in the early 2000s when I was a research fellow. It was just an amazing, incredible time, and I'm just so thankful to be invited here by the Wolfsonian and the Museum of the Miami Design Preservation League. It's so special to be here at Art Deco Weekend. It's just an incredible experience. I'm also grateful to have been a fellow at the Wolfsonian, where I was conducting some of the research for my book, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. And I'm grateful for all of you for coming to learn about this person, John Vassos, and his work, as well as a bit about the history of industrial design and the changing shape of radio as it transformed from something people knew nothing about, had no prior shape or form, to something that took shape. Oops, sorry. His only biographer, I discovered him, as John mentioned, I worked at the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum and an exhibition about industrial design. This was in like the mid-90s, and as a researcher for the exhibit, we were looking at all the people that we wanted to include, and John Vassos was not one of them. And he just was like kind of left out of the story a lot, and that's what my work tried to do, was to try to tell his story and piece together the two parts of his career, first as an illustrator and second as an industrial designer for the megalithic company RCA, which in the 1930s was, I guess you could say, like the Apple of today. Just an enormously powerful, large company that hired people like John Vassos to give a shape to their newest technology, which was radio. Here he is. He's some rather handsome fellow, I thought. And maybe this is something about being a biographer, but I felt so close to him, working in his papers at the Archives of American Art and piecing together his story. When he died in 1985, his nephew, he didn't have any children, took his papers, and it seemed like he just poured them into boxes and shipped them to the Archives of American Art, and that was kind of what I was working with. They were uncatalogued, and it was just a very exciting process to kind of piece together his story. I found some weird things in the archives. I found an army ration kit. I found some pornography. I found a veteran fair that he was having, and at one point I thought I smelled his cologne. Like, I just got to know him so well. So I'm a little bit of a Vassos fanatic, so please forgive me. You know, it was just very exciting to be able to share his story. I never met him. I have met his family members, his niece, and others. I've sat at his kitchen table in Long Island and just been immersed in him. But I guess I'll kind of tell you why he touched me so much. Partly because he was left out of that exhibit, partly because he was an immigrant from Greece. He was from, he was a Greek immigrant. His family lived in Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, and he immigrated to the United States. He, so unlike some of the other industrial designers, he was kind of, as an immigrant, I think that was maybe part of the reason he was kind of left out of the story. But here he is in all his glory and splendor in the late 1920s with a deco screen that he designed, and even earlier, his name went through kind of different manifestations. Here he's spelling it B-A-S-S-O. He added the S. It's like a lot of people creating their identity and becoming who they are. And he was an illustrator, an artist, and an advertiser. He fled Turkey when a cartoon he had drawn angered the Turkish authorities, because as Greek immigrants living, in Turkey, they had a conflictual relationship with the powers that be, so he got out of there. But what I just really want to say is that he was an artist from an early age, and it got him into trouble. And he did have a kind of, just a skill and a flair and a real talent for illustration. And some people might know his work through his illustrated books, of which You can still kind of find on eBay. They're sort of accessible and just oh so beautiful. I mean, you could just really get a sense of the deco vibe from this cover, like the curves and just the silver color and the font. Just a real deco feel. Are you feeling it? You're feeling the deco vibe from them? Like, you just get the sense in Miami, you're surrounded by this architecture, and in fact, a Wolfsonian has a walking tour of Art Deco Miami along with the Preservation League, but this is taken from a page where they're looking at Contempo compared to the Congress Hotel. This is a book that John wrote with his wife, Ruth Vassos, who was an American fashion designer. He wrote many books with her. This is from 1929. And that book is just, it's this very special book, like his other Art Deco books. What kind of was cool or surprising to me about it was that it wasn't just a celebration of the beautiful machine age and the art and design of the time and urbanization and roaring 20s and all that excitement. It was also a bit of a critique. And I have a quote here from the book, feed the eyes, stimulate the imagination, tickle the appetite of the mob with pictures of pretty girls, pictures of legs, weeklies, monthlies, dailies, newspapers, newsreels, from the pulpit, from the press, from the editorial pages, from the radio. Don't leave a surface untouched. And they're kind of referring to this, just so much commercialism, so much just say a kind of corrupt underbelly of the Art Deco age, not just the roaring 20s, but also something happening in the mass media, something being sold, something being, there's the rise of fascism also. There's kind of fears about the use of these technologies and the powers they hold. In fact, these are fears we kind of still have today sometimes when we think about the power of large technology companies or our phones spying on us or what. So there was this questioning. And that's what I really loved about him. That's what really drew me to him, because I felt like a real kinship to that philosophy and that approach to modern life, which of course with the Art Deco fabulousness, it's wonderful, but also there is that kind of underside. And this was a kind of theme he developed much further in his book Phobia, which in 1931 he met a Freudian psychoanalyst named Harry Stack Sullivan. Actually, he met him in Baltimore, where I live. He met him at a place where a friend of theirs had a nervous breakdown. And he got to thinking, like many people of that time, Freudian ideas were becoming very popular. People were becoming influenced by it. There was an understanding of the unconscious. And this is something we kind of take for granted today, but it was something new in the 1920s about human development and this underbelly of the self. And it's something he explored. For instance, in this kind of gory picture of called Mechanophobia, fear of machines. The one on the left is my personal favorite. It's the one that started it all for me. Dromophobia, fear of crossing the streets. Have you ever felt that way? Crossing the street, like, and that's totally how I felt living in New York City, and just, the cars look different, of course, not these 1930s kind of cars, but just, that feeling of being small and being run over by machinery, or just being the kind of dangers of daily life. And I thought he just captured that so beautifully. At the same time that he was writing these books and illustrating books that were critical of capitalism, you could say, or of mass society, or of urbanization, he was also doing advertisements for cars, for cosmetics, for perfumes, for all kinds of things, making his way in the world commercially, but also having this sentiment of kind of critique or questioning of society, questioning of some of the ills of modern society, of the machine age. And that's why I was so surprised to find out that he had worked for RCA for 40 years as one of their lead consultant designers, creating the shape of their major products like radios, like televisions, and broadcast equipment. So I thought that was a really interesting contradiction. And I wanted to know more about that, and also about how his books influenced his industrial design and his design work, and how he approached making a shape for radio and television that had no prior shape. So his design philosophy was to take into account these modern day phobias, these fears that people could have of living in cities or crowds or all the phobias he lists in his book. Then he said the complexity of life is increasing, starts phobias, simplification by styling can change this. So there was a feeling that modern design could save us, or make our lives better or easier, or less frightening. This is on the left is a cosmetic bottle he did, 1929. Just has a very simple, modern styling. It reminds me a lot of the Chanel bottle. If you've seen that, just very nice in the palm of your hand, very clear, very, very simple and elegant. And I really want to say that Vassos, he was a stylist in the Art Deco sensibility, but he was also a modernist. And he was very much wedded to modernism as a design philosophy, which meant kind of simplicity, not crazy streamlined curves you see in some people's work, but really a more of a modern approach, like more geometrical, really kind of trying to stay true to the materials that he was working with and true to the machinery that was underneath. This is a radio from 1939 that has that same kind of sensibility. So he's not going to be all wacko, streamlined, teardrop shaped. He's going to have more geometric shapes, more simple styling, some decorative aspects to it, but really not so much about the streamlined modern, some people call it. Although, so here he has an ad for Bakelite. He was quite well known, like in the 30s, from his books, from his design work, he was very good publicity about himself. He did a hot dog stand in New York, like many industrial designers who entered this brand new field. It's such a bad name. I can't believe they never came up with a better name. Industrial design sounds like people who are designing for factories, but it was really people who were designing everyday products so that manufacturers could distinguish their products to make beauty a new sales tool. So people like Vassos and many other, mostly men, some women, just entered into this field. It had no real professional boundaries. There wasn't like school, you couldn't get a degree in industrial design. You just kind of jumped into it. Kind of like today, maybe with computer programming or, people who are doing apps. Like it's kind of a Wild West, like an open profession, and that's kind of what it was back then. So people like him kind of just had a good flair and a good style. People came from theater and other fields. Anyway, this is a restaurant that he stopped, and he wanted people to feel comfortable as they bought their hot dogs. This is a restaurant in New York City, and the Bakelite Company. If you were here earlier for Harvey's lecture before me, Harvey Mattel, an incredible radio lecture, talked a little bit about the materials that were being used in the 1930s, new materials like Bakelite, new plastics, new ways of making things shiny and sleek and desirable, and that was sort of the case with Nedick's hot dog stand in New York. He also took this styling of industrial design and interior design in his music corner for the 1939 World's Fair, which not many people know about, but that was where television was first introduced. Right here at the Wolfsonian, when the permanent collection returns, you can see his Art Deco turnstile, which is so cool because in a lot of places this turnstile is still used. In Camden Yards, where the Orioles play, okay, they're not a good team, I know, but they do play at Camden Yards, and to get to an Orioles game, you pass through one of these Art Deco turnstiles. And up until, if you've been in New York City subway in the past 20 years, you've passed through a John Vassos turnstile, which is kind of cool. It's like deco in daily life, but it's beautiful, it's modern. His goal was to change the turnstile from a propeller. He called it the goosemeter, because when people went through it, like their butt would get hit by the propeller. So he was like, no, we have to do something that's better, that doesn't hurt, hurt people or hit them in the back of the coat. So what else was he doing this time? Just a bit of everything. One of the things he was doing was drawing murals on the walls of a radio building in Philadelphia. And here he is, a young, handsome man. Here's me with my crush again. Drawing a great God radio. And of course the 30s is the great era of murals. And he was invited by this CBS radio tower. It's a beautiful skyscraper on Chestnut Street, Chestnut Avenue in Philadelphia, if you get a chance to see it. But while he was painting these murals, this great homage to radio and the wonders and excitement that it's going to bring, he was stopped by an RCA executive who said, "Hey, John, can you stop by our offices in Camden, New Jersey? Maybe we'll talk to you about designing some of our radios." And he was like, "Yeah, definitely." This was a huge area for designers and for radio corporations like RCA. They were just building exponentially, including the RCA building in Rockefeller Center, 30 Rock, still there, a great homage, a towering tribute to the excitement of radio. And that's kind of why we're all here, the excitement of radio and just the feeling that it's going to take over the world and transform our lives. And interestingly, RCA owned NBC, so that was their broadcast arm. So they really were the huge power in radio broadcasting and in radio receiver production. And when Vassos was hired to design their radios, they were fifth in receiver sales. So they had to do something. In fact, radio was thought of, the production side was thought of as a way to sell the receivers. Interestingly, so they needed to do something to get the radio receivers sold and in people's hands. So of course they were willing to take a chance with an artist like Vassos who never designed a radio because things were changing really fast in the radio industry. And I don't know how many of you were here for Harvey's talk, but he kind of took us through the evolution of radio as a technology, as it transformed kind of from this ham amateur radio thing that was in the grandpa's hobby or people's hobby in the basement or in the garage, leaking battery acid all over the place, to its entry into the home, where I guess women, mothers, wives said, "Okay, you can come," because it's just not this thing. So the transformation of radio technology made this so, and one of the big changes, of course, is being able to hear the radio, the way the sound is amplified. So it's so funny when you look at pictures from the 20s and 30s of people wearing headphones. I just totally had thought that was like a 70s, 80s thing before studying this era, but it is kind of funny. And then sort of like Atwater Kent, this is an example of a radio with a speaker that's external, like an externalized speaker. Does it remind you of anything, that radio? What does it remind you of? Yeah, right, it looks like a Victrola phonograph. So what's happening is that when people design things, often they look, when there's a new technology, they look in their rear view mirror, we could say. They look at what was happening in the past and then would incorporate that into the new design. Like we have files on our computer. They look like files, but they're not files. So it's like how new technologies are welcomed and absorbed into our lives by what was familiar from the past. So like this example of the radio on the left, which is a very traditional kind of style radio, and this radio, and I said this or that, like for that diet thing when you choose, like which one fattening? Do you choose the M&Ms or do you choose other? So like, well, this or that. So like how many of you choose this radio? How many of you love that? The Cathedral, you love it? A few people, yeah, it's looks like stained glass, like it has a kind of church feel. This is called grill cloth. I learned like all these totally like radio details, and Harvey was talking about these details as a collector. For me it was new, but the grill cloth looks almost like lace. This very beautiful, has a kind of almost Victorian styling, something very acceptable in the home. It would look very pretty, something familiar. Whereas this radio was one of Vassos' early designs for RCA. And what is that like? What does that tell you? Or what does that say to you?
Art Deco.
Yeah. It's just screaming Art Deco. It just has those awesome chrome styling. What else says Art Deco to you? The curves. Yeah, the curves, the shape, the circular speaker area. So this was one of his first attempts, but it didn't really stick to what we think of as a radio, right? Can you see people cuddling around this, listening to a fireside chat? No, not very cuddly, not very warm. So the shape that radio took was a little bit of a different direction. But what's exciting to me as a scholar of technology is to look at what happens when we have this really creative period when it's not really clear what something will look like or something will, take shape. And that was really what was happening with radio. And it's just an incredible blossoming of shapes and styles and ideas about what it should look like because there's no consensus. So this is just such an exciting time. I wanted to point out to you also at this time, people didn't really like the idea that radio would become commercialized, that the broadcasting industry would be an advertising one. People wanted it to be public, kind of more like a British model, like if you've heard of the BBC or Canadian CBC. And so there was a movement afoot for really people to just stop this being commercialized. But of course, as we know, the bargain was dropped and radio became a commercial medium. This lady is saying, she's looking at the different radios for sale and saying, would I get shorter commercials from that little one? So, just to think about how these products were contextualized, how they were part of the culture at the time. This is a British radio by Wells and Coates, and this is from the Wolfsonian, a beautiful example of a very modernistic looking radio. In terms of its shape, its styling, kind of similar to Vassos' radio. This is a little nipper. This is an early John Vassos design. What does this radio remind you of? What do you think about when you see that? Bakelite, yeah, the material is Bakelite, so that new plastic material that was actually somewhat cheaper to produce than using wood. Harvey had mentioned this morning that people at first wanted radios to look wood, like the cathedral, to look familiar, something that they knew. And then with plastics, became sort of like the whole world opened up, and it was also cheaper to produce because of the molding, the plastic molding process from the assembly line. So this radio, I think this is so beautiful. To me, it looks like a marshmallow or something you might want to eat, just so delicious. And I think that it was part of the effort to make it palatable, to make it domesticated, to make radios things that people would want to have in their house. Kind of frivolous, fun, and just wonderful. I quote an industrial design historian who says in very complex terms that a lot of what design was doing was to domesticate the disruptive experience of modernity. So something like a radio, it's kind of mind-boggling in a way. Before there was no precedent. You could have a telegraph, or what Harvey said, a carrier pigeon. How did you send messages? How did you talk to people? You might talk to them on the telephone. Very few people had telephones in the 1930s. A lot of people didn't even have electricity. But the radio was just a completely new experience, a new way of compressing time and space. You could travel. You could be in a different place. You could be in a different country. You could just, it was just a very weird and exciting and sometimes frightening thing for people to be able to fathom what was happening. And people thought they could hear ghosts on their radios. There was this feeling, it was just kind of like how we think that, our computers are spying on us when they are sometimes. But this idea that it's so weird, what's happening? You don't really know. Want to just run through some interesting ways in which the interpretation of the radio design happened. And Harvey had this globe radio here earlier, the actual radio. This is an advertisement, which I took a photograph of when I visited your collection. Those years ago, which was so wonderful, I'm so grateful for opening your collection to scholars to be able to see advertisements like this. And this is related to Radio by Raymond Loewy. But what I like so much about it was it said radio is finally been given its natural design. Like how many radios did you see after this one that looked like that? It was kind of a free-for-all. I'm not going to focus so much on the designers as I am more like on the shapes of the radio. What does this look like to you?
Hotel. Skyscraper.
Yeah, like a skyscraper, or the Park Central Hotel, or it's definitely, as Mr. Wolfson said earlier, that objects tell a story. And this radio is telling us a story about a time when skyscrapers were new or exciting, and radios had no shape or form, so it couldn't look like anything. This is John Vassos' radio on the left. It's actually on the cover of my book. I love it so much because it just has the architectural feel to it. It looks a bit like the Cardozo Hotel, in its shape, in its curvature. Vassos not only designed radios and broadcasting equipment, he also designed transmitter buildings. He did a little bit of everything. And it was again before the professional roles were so solidified. So this is a sketch he did for a kind of WRCA, a kind of fictional radio station, but he was building sketches for radio towers, for broadcasting, for many products that they were producing at the time, not just radios. Now this is like where I bring you down. This is the kind of like, I'm taking you on a journey. This is like the low point of our journey. Of course, because we recognize in maybe looking at these images that the radio has also been associated with propaganda and with the evils of fascism and the Nazi control and power. And I wanted to point out the shape of this radio. Like, what could that tell you about that society? These radios were produced by the Nazis and cheaply distributed to people so that they would only have access to Nazi radio stations at the time. And if you were caught trying to find other stations, you could go to prison, or worse, go to a concentration camp or be killed. So there was a high penalty for going beyond the bounds of what was allowed on this radio. So built into the radio was the censorship, was the control. The radio, of course, is a very powerful tool of social control. You kind of see it in the picture, like the masses surrounded by the radio, or the voice of Goebbels or whoever is speaking. So this is another interpretation of radio. It's not very ornate at all. It's just very kind of straightforward, and this is what it is. Now I'm going to bring you up again, hopefully, and kind of heighten your awareness of how we use radios or how we use technology around us. And one thing I thought Vassos was really good at was being aware of how people interface, we would say today, or how his designs became user-friendly. Not a term they had back in the 30s, but maybe something you've heard about today, how something is made user-friendly. And in his archives, I found sketches like this, where he's thinking about the fingers touching the knob, the eye, and how you read the dial. He was a fan of the slide rule dial, that you kind of read from left to right, how you find the stations. And there were just many ways of interpreting that part of the radio design. Would you have a circle airplane interface, or would you have this one, or we just looked at other examples. But this is kind of the one that sort of won out. There is a simplicity and a ease of use with the buttons that he's kind of famous for, and that I think is really part of what distinguishes his radios. This is a drawing that's in the Wolfsonian collection that I just thought so beautifully illustrated another approach to how you could find your way around a radio. And in the artist has drawn the different countries that you would be getting when you hit the dial and you got to them. And I thought that was a really clever way of helping people find where their station was, as opposed to reading the number or something. I just thought, wow, this is a beautiful interpretation of that. So I mentioned that one of Vassos' strengths was his approach to the interface, or like, this is my one prompt. They say you should always have a prompt in a talk. This is my prompt. I really wanted to bring you a harmonica designed by John Vassos and just play a little for you, a beautiful streamlined harmonica, but I'll hold up my phone and I'll say that, this is something we use, we touch it. It's a main interface we have is touching. It's tactile. A fancy word is haptic, and there's even a haptic switch on here where it can be just touch oriented. So this is something that really kind of we think about a lot in our society, not just the dominance of the eye and how it looks, but also how we use it. And Vassos was kind of famous for this in-house. He talked about how knobs became really important. And because he was designing broadcast equipment like transmitters and in-house things, he was aware of how they were being used by engineers every day. And I think he brought this sensibility to the consumer products that he designed. So this is an article he wrote for Broadcast News. Here's some examples of more industrial products, the transmitter, and he also designed the electron microscope with Vladimir's work in. This is a design, something you might be more famous from his oeuvre, his work, is this gorgeous phonograph on the left. What you might not know is he also designed the phonograph in 1949, the post-war phonograph. That is, to me, is really a beautiful example of simplicity and elegance in design. And of course, RCA was coming out with the 45 RPM record, and there was a big battle between them and CBS for the 33. And it was just a kind of exciting time. But again, it's like, I like how he approached the interpretation of the phonograph. He also came up with having color-coded records. Kind of fun. I have one of them, and it works. It stood the test of time. He also, this idea of the machine as an extension of our body, something we control, something that makes us smarter, our smartphone, that was kind of true back in terms of radio as well. So the RCA Victor campaign, Vassos took credit for it. He said that the magic, he came up with it, I'm not sure, but the magic brain, magic eye, you may have seen this symbols if you're familiar with 1930s RCA radio advertising. When he retired from the company in 1975, they referred to him as like the magic brain of the company. So he was there from 1935 to 1975. I just gonna have kind of short on time because I'm just so excited and I have so much to tell you. But what happened next was the newest technology on the block, and now I'm going back to the 30s. What do you think? What do you think's happening next? TV. All right. Television. Look ahead. So television was actually a 1930s phenomenon, something that had been in the plans, in the works, and just such an exciting evolution. And for Vassos, it was very exciting for him to be able to work on the designs for these radios. And I just think he had it in mind. Here he is in 1939, and just had it in mind and thinking about bringing pictures to radio sight, bringing radio sight to radio sound. So it's like so I know we're talking about radios, but I'm just kind of saying that the television was an extension of the radio. And that was how it was thought of. It was, RCA released their first TVs, the first regular broadcasting happened in 1939 World's Fair, and the televisions were displayed in a radio tube, a building that looked like a radio tube. So it's kind of a fun part of the 1939 World's Fair that you don't hear as much about. But this idea of televisions in the 30s was a thing. This television was the Phantom TV, kind of showing people that it was real, it wasn't just magic. At the same time, these televisions went on the market, and they were super expensive. We're lucky that the Wolfsonian has one, so you can actually see it when the permanent collection goes back on display. This is an example. This is a TRK-12.
And they have the micros.
Exactly.
We have the 75.
It's true, it's true. Yeah, the screens we've changed our screen sizes. Now we have a small one. And we have big ones in our house. And this screen size was kind of the best they could do at the time with the technology, but it's just so gorgeous. Vassos talked about using very minimal design for like the ventilation. But the rich woods, so gorgeous. So I quote Ellen Lupton here, who's one of my favorite design historians, saying you could touch it with your eye. Like it just looks so gorgeous and so delectable and just so rich and wonderful. I kind of need to start wrapping up, but just I wanted to show you that this television was $600. What do you know? Like, what could you buy with $600 in a car? Yeah, you could buy a car. It was very expensive, so it's no wonder that the advertising shows people in evening gowns watching their television. It's like, don't you all do that? Do you do that? They are not couch potatoes. They are just really not, and there they are tuning their television. Just to wrap up and kind of summarize, in the post-war period, Vassos did other work for other manufacturers. He worked on the Constellation jukebox. He did the accordions for Hohner. He also was part of getting color television out in the market and thinking about the display in the 1964 World's Fair. And as just the portable radio became the new big thing, right? The transistor. And this is just showing the individualized nature of the radio. That it's something that people would have and buy for themselves, kind of more of a consumer individual product than something for your home. These are kind of two radio designs, one by Vassos and one by one of his colleagues at RCA, which kind of show again, like, it's not clear what it looks like. What do you think these look like? Yeah, they look very super modern, super, I don't know, super sleek, super futuristic. And here's John. I think it's significant that he's kind of touching the knob, because that really, is something that he really added to the value of radios and televisions, and later the other work that he did for RCA and the RCA 501 computer color-coded. I just thought he brought a nice sensibility, and just coming from his earlier days of someone who's kind of critical of mass society or of mass media. I thought he came up with a way of making technology palatable, familiar, something usable, user-friendly, and something. He was on a panel discussion at MoMA, and he was talking about what was important to him for design was to think about the machine, that it's important to think about our everyday objects in our lives. Not just, a lot of times, he criticized MoMA for having too many chairs. And he was just all about, we have to feature machines, and that's something that Mr. Wolfson has done very much and is very prophetic in knowing that these daily objects and these beautiful pieces from everyday life are significant, can teach us about our history, can teach us about the world that we live in, and can inspire scholars and designers of the future, and just give us so much rich information about our society. So I'm so grateful to the Wolfsonian for having me as a scholar in the 2000s, and for having me back today to talk to you a little bit about John Vassos and his radios and televisions. And I'm happy to take any questions if you want. Yes?
Hey, well, I do have a question about Mr. Vassos. He worked there for 40 years. Do you believe he worked alone, or did he have a big staff claim credit, or he actually designed this stuff by himself?
Yeah, it was a team. So when he first got there, he was head of creating a consumer styling team. So he brought people on, like Lynn Broughton, whose image I showed. So it was part of a styling team, which he led. But of course, as a historian, I would find things that he signed. Unfortunately, he doesn't have too many patents. He does have patents for edge lighting, for the tuning mechanism, but things that I have given him credit for are things that designs that I found that he signed, or that he was a part of, or that he mentioned in his autobiography. But he was part of a team. It was a team approach.
I have a feeling too that RCA, if they hire somebody for design, the designs they come up with belong to RCA.
Exactly, yes.
Doesn't go to him.
Exactly. And certainly in the early days, in the 30s, it was kind of like more of a creative time period where someone like him could be involved in marketing and styling and just all different parts of the company. But then in the post-war period, things got more sophisticated, more like a well-oiled machine. And in fact, Vassos was a part of a group of people creating the curriculum for industrial design students to go to college and to get a degree in that field. So he was very much a part of solidifying that field. And that's what happened in the post-war era. Yes?
Do you have a favorite John Vassos design?
Yeah, I do. I really love the one I showed you when I compared it with the cathedral radio. I just love that one. Sorry, I love that one. But I love this one so much because it's so modern. It just really follows I think what he was trying to work out was a really elegance and simplicity for the machine underneath. So it's about highlighting the speaker. It's about highlighting the tuning area. Just really kind of what we like today about our iPhone, like it gets to the point. It's square, it fits in our pocket, and we can find the buttons we need quickly. It is what it is, and that's, I think, something we appreciate about the machines in our life. And just knowing his philosophy and the kind of work that he appreciated. I think he would say that this, I don't know, he liked that. The little nipper also. It's nice, colorful. I like that as well. But it's a kind of elegance. Maybe too severe, when it looks severe in this radio. But yeah, I like a lot of his stuff. I like his pens. For Waterman, he did like lucite pens. The Century pen he designed for Waterman. Just lots, so many different products. I like the turnstile.
Are you a collector as well? Any stuff?
I have a few things. I'm not a great collector. Like I was saying earlier, I'll buy something on eBay and then it'll come to me and it will smell like mildew. And I'm just like, I do have a few of his radios, and I have like little children. I have 8-year-old twins. And they love playing with the knobs. It just like, they're so touchable, they're so tactile. So yeah, the few that I have, oh my gosh, I have a Hohner accordion that he designed, this gorgeous Hohner accordion. My kids destroyed it. So I obviously should not let my kids, or cat, near my collectibles, but I have a number of his books, but they're out, there's so many of his designs are out there, and so I kind of leave this for you as well. Like you could find his work that's out there that isn't not recognizable, but isn't really super well known, and I think that's also really special. And I think there's more attention being paid now to Art Deco radio, although you've been paying attention to it for a while, Harvey, but I think there's an acceptance that it is a valuable medium, that it's something we can look to. Is something being well designed. But for a long time, design museums didn't include those kinds of things. Yes, Mr. Wolfson.
So I just wondered, what about his private life, and why did he move to Miami Beach?
Okay. He lived in Norfolk, Connecticut. So first he lived in New York City, on the Upper West Side, and then he moved to Connecticut, and then he had a summer home in Miami. I should have mentioned that. So he came here, he did a mural for the Conondado resort. I think he was doing really well, like in the post-war period, and was able to buy, it was like a winter home, a condo, and yeah, he did designs for the U.S. Buildings in trade fairs. Like he was just doing very well. So I think that it was the dream to come to Florida, to come to Miami, certainly. But his personal life, he was married for a long time to Ruth. He had some affairs, especially with the ballerina that he was in love with. So he was,
She was sleek.
She was sleek. Exactly. She was sleek. Yes, Harvey.
Danielle, I have just one more comment that I think is important. The Skyscape Scraper radio you showed next to the hotel. These designers could draw Vassos as an artist, but then you have to buy them. To make that skyscraper radio at the time, the technology was a machine 60 feet tall, mustering 10,000 pounds of pressure per square inch was required to make that design and the definition that you see on that radio. It's not a simple task in 1933.
It's true. It's true. Thank you for pointing that out. That it was a real artistry, a real commitment to the beauty and artistry.
Thank you.
Yes.
The mural in Miami, is that still here? Do you know?
No, I don't. No, I don't think so. Yes. Yeah. But there are, things that are mass-produced that you can find, like the phonograph or pieces. But yes, murals. Yes, it's too bad they weren't preserved. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all so